Hello ladies and gentlemen, I am the Top Hat Gaming Man, aka the greatest showman on the entirety of the information superhighway. Yeah. Anyway, if you watch my channel, you may be aware that I have just uploaded a 40-minute in-depth video all about the Nintendo 64. It is a retrospective giving my history and experiences with the system, an overlook of general history of the system. It looks at loads of the games, talks about what the multiplayer was like on the system, and generally concludes on whether or not the Nintendo 64 is still worth playing in 2018. Despite the fact that this video was extremely long with a runtime of 40 minutes, I could still never talk about everything about the system in this video. And one element regarding the Nintendo 64 I felt I overlooked somewhat in that video was having the opportunity to talk about in much depth about The Legend of Zelda The Ocarina of Time, a game in which many people today consider extremely overrated. So the topic of this video is obviously all about, is The Ocarina of Time overrated? So let's explore that from my perspective. So I got The Legend of Zelda The Ocarina of Time back in Christmas of 1998. I remember thoroughly enjoying the game that day. I remember starting out in Kuriki Woods, seeing the perspective of that annoying fairy thing, Navi, flying around, giving a little look of the area, and it looked lovely. It looked delightful for the time period, I would say. So I remember exploring that area for a while, soon crawling through that little hole and getting my sword, and then obviously going off to the Deku Tree to take on the first dungeon. Now that was a good, fun experience, but then the game got even better. As soon as I finished that, I got to go out into Hyrule Field, and that's when I noticed I had an entire huge world to explore ahead of me. Thinking about it, that was the first 3D open world game I remember ever playing. And when I think about it, was it one of the first true 3D open world games? I'll have to think about that one. Let me know in the comments section actually. Sure, I had Mario 64 before that, but obviously with Mario 64 you had like the castle as an open world, and then you jumped through the paintings that enter multiple sub-worlds, so it was like worlds within worlds, I suppose. But yes, that was all jolly good fun. And then I was playing the game for ages, and then I finally remember getting the Master Sword, thinking this game must be nearly done, because so far this whole experience has been outrageously epic. But then to my surprise, the game got even more ridiculously epic, because your childish child Link grew up and you were suddenly playing as Man Link, and playing as Man Link just felt more satisfying, and then the world got more darker and edgier, and the whole experience began to feel even more grown up and more epic. Such a great epic game. I'm not doing a very good job so far, am I, of doing a video about Zelda being overrated, because all I've done so far is fawned over the quality of this game at the time. I suppose I bloody loved it. But thinking about it, I loved it, but I remember a lot of my friends absolutely hating it, and in fact despising it. And I suppose that could be one of the elements as to which indicates towards many people believing the game is overrated. Like, I know a lot of people didn't like Zelda, or any Zelda game in general, due to the fact that there's a lot of puzzle solving and problem solving in Zelda, isn't there? And the average gamer does not like problem solving. You know, most of the modern gamers today are happy with playing a little bit of FIFA and a little bit of Call of Duty. It wasn't that much different back then. A lot of people was happy with just playing International Superstar Soccer and a little bit of GoldenEye and Mario Kart. Really simplistic games. So Ocarina of Time just wasn't for them necessarily. It was too complicated, too detailed and too in-depth. For me though, I had come off the back of a couple of years earlier completing Link to the Past on the Super Nintendo, and I really loved Link to the Past. That was probably my favourite Super Nintendo game at the time. So to get the Ocarina of Time on the Nintendo 64, it pretty much delivered the exact same sort of game, just in a 3D environment instead. So that was amazing at the time. It was high tech, it was sophisticated, it was brilliant. So in regards to being overrated so far, I did not find. I found the experience amazing, and it was it's personally my favourite Nintendo 64 game of all time. But let's divert slightly over to other Zelda games for a little bit. Ocarina of Time got fantastic, amazing review scores at the time, but for some reason, most Zelda games have got fantastic review scores, and I think some of them don't deserve the critical reception they received for some reason. Like, Ocarina of Time was groundbreaking. Everything about it was stuff we'd never seen before in games. But let's take Skyward Sword, for example. Why did that get 10 out of 10 as well? Because there was nothing particularly groundbreaking about Skyward Sword. It was just the regular Zelda formula. Everything we'd seen before, except for obviously the motion controls, if we're going to take that into account. But why would adding motion controls to a game, and motion controls I may add which barely functioned, which felt broken half of the time, lead to a game getting a 10 out of 10 review score? See, that seems a bit odd to me. So that seems like a game that got 10 out of 10 just because it had Zelda in the title. I'd say the same thing perhaps goes for the two Oracle games as well, because they just pretty much felt like Link's Awakening ROM hacks. We already had Link's Awakening as a great standalone fantastic title, and then Capcom a few years later released two more games with different dungeons and a different overworld, which looked and played very similar to Link's Awakening. So again, nothing groundbreaking, so I did not think they deserved perfect scores either. But Ocarina of Time, on the other hand, it really did deliver to another level at the time, which those other games did not. But also, with regards to it being overrated, another reason which people get annoyed about it is it's often cited as the benchmark of gaming, literally considered the greatest game ever made. So, is this fact, is this opinion, or is this just hyperbole? Let's talk about this just a little bit. So at the time, I'd say Ocarina of Time was definitely the greatest game on the Nintendo 64, although not to everyone's taste. So you could argue that that was just my silly opinion, which I was just trying to force down your throats. Silly me, eh? But anyway, with regards to the greatest game of all time, that's a really subjective thing, isn't it? Like, how can anyone truly say this game is the greatest game of all time? I don't really think that's possible. Games are too different. So if you're saying Zelda Ocarina of Time is the greatest game of all time, then yes, you probably are overrating the game somewhat. Yes, it was amazing, but even the original version of the game, which appeared on the Nintendo 64, you can't say that's the greatest game of all time anymore, because there's a superior version on the Nintendo 3DS, for example. In fact, the original version on the Nintendo 64, you could even say is somewhat obsolete these days, couldn't you? You could really put a strong case for the game reaching a total phase of obsolescence, because we have recently, well not recently, but in recent years, received a superior version on the Nintendo 3DS. Ocarina of Time 3D on the 3DS is a superior version in the fact that it features souped up, nicer looking graphics, so we don't have to look at that horrible, misty, polygony look of the Nintendo 64 on that platform. And more importantly, they've actually fixed a few of the mechanics of the game in it. So as great as Ocarina of Time was, like all games, it still had lots of flaws. And one of the flaws was that pesky water temple. Who remembers exploring that little bugger? Because I certainly do. I feel like I sunk bloody months into the water temple, to excuse the pun. Sunk? Did you get that? That was great, wasn't it? Yeah. You've got to love my improvisation. I really am the greatest showman, aren't I? Yes, I am. So yes, this bloody water temple, as I said, sunk a lot of time into it. And it turns out that I was actually being a little bit of an idiot, because I remember there was a platform where water rises up and down, and I just had to like put on the metal boots and then jump down the hole where the platform would rise on, but I didn't know there was a hole underneath the platform. But I lost months of playtime due to that. But yes, apart from my stupidity, that wasn't the main problem with the water temple. The main problem with the water temple was those bloody heavy metal boots you had to wear. Basically, whenever you had to equip or unequip these metal boots, they wasn't part of the C system of buttons. Like, no, you had the yellow C buttons you pressed. Instead, to put on the bloody boots, you had to press the start button, access a system menu. You then had to flick through the menus, pressing the R button, I believe, then select your boots, And to take them off, you'd have to go through that process again. And take them on and off, on and off, on and off, flicking through these menus. It was bloody annoying. But obviously with the 3DS's touchscreen, it fixed this problem. So, if we are going to say the Ocarina of Time is the greatest game of all time, we can't say the Nintendo 64 version. Now we would have to say, is Ocarina of Time 3D the greatest game of all time? Which, that's quite difficult to make a case for, isn't it? When you look at the quality of so many other just Nintendo 3DS titles, for example. There's a lot of games up there you could say which are just as good as the Ocarina of Time. You could argue that the Ocarina of Time may have been the best game that would have tripping over my words a bit. You could argue that the Ocarina of Time was perhaps the greatest game that had ever been made in 1998, but there's absolutely no chance that you could ever be bold enough to say it's been the best game ever made 20 years on. There's been many games that have been deeper, with more to do, and have just been all-round, more in-depth experiences than which Ocarina of Time has delivered. As great as it is, it's not the greatest game that has been made anymore. Absolutely no chance. And in fact, thinking back, you could even have made a case back then that Ocarina of Time wasn't the greatest game then. There was other titles which were equally as fun as enjoyable. As I said, a lot of people liked GoldenEye, a lot of people liked Mario Kart, and personally, as much as I love the Ocarina of Time, I'd say there was a strong case for me enjoying Final Fantasy VII just as much. So even over on the PlayStation as well, there was a game which was the Ocarina of Time's equal, which perhaps even offered a deeper experience, but that's a debate for a whole nother time. In fact, that could be another video. What's better, the Ocarina of Time or Final Fantasy VII? That's quite a good question. In fact, I would like you to try and talk about that in my comment section. Let me know which of those two games is better. But apart from just writing that, because that really annoys me when people put one-word answers in my comment section, state a reason why you think the Ocarina of Time or Final Fantasy VII is better. I want legitimate reasons, otherwise just type in a random word. No one gets anything from that, do they? Nothing to read. Boring. So put some thought into your bloody comments. Yeah. So, to conclude this video, is the Ocarina of Time overrated? Well, I suppose it depends who you are. If you're going around claiming it's the greatest game of all time, then yes, you are overrating the game. If you're one of those lowbrow gamers who couldn't play the Ocarina of Time because it was too complex for your little brain, then obviously the game is underrated in your mind. So, is it overrated? Inconclusive, I suppose. So let's all argue about it in the comment section. That'd be good, won't it? Cheerio!